All right, thanks everybody for joining. Really appreciate it. This is an amazing panel. So I'm just going to introduce everybody real briefly, and then we'll dive into questions. Today we're talking about the sync world, placements, video games, movies, TV shows, TV commercials, anywhere you can get your stuff. So first, just want to introduce, let's see, we'll start with Jake Versluis. Jake Versluis of Position Music. We got Michael Kaminsky from KMG Management, correct? We've got artist Evalyn and Naaman Snell from Space Cowboy Music, and Mike Mowery from 10th Street Entertainment. Everybody, hi, thanks so much for being here. Jake, let's start with you, if you don't mind. First question is sync licensing the jackpot that it seems to be? It helps with building a fan base. It pays. You don't need to get in the van, and it gets you industry attention. Is it everything? Is it like the bonanza it seems like it should be?
I'm trying to think of a downside to it, and I'm not coming up with any. It first came on my radar in the early 2000s when I was in management, and yeah, it kind of ticked all those boxes. It's all the things you said. It's a revenue generator. It's marketing and credits for the artist. It's fun to do. If you're not a fan of the road, it keeps you off the road. If you are on the road, it's supplemental income, paying for the things you need on the road. And yeah, quite frankly, there's a number of artists who've done the traditional artist thing, who've kind of stumbled into the sync world and found some real comfort there, and have chosen to kind of alter their career path to more or less do that full time. I've definitely seen a lot of success stories coming up through the sync world in the last 15 years that I've been doing this. And like I said, I've yet to see a downside to it.
Michael, our placements and syncs, is that even more about who you know than even the rest of the business already is?
Oh, that's a great question. A lot of it is, right? A lot of it is, I think. There's kind of the piece that's gone around the industry of like, there's the handful of gatekeepers who really have ingrained themselves as being wonderful at their job, and they really do have a lot of decision-making power. With that said, I think if you are an artist who works very hard and really refines your approach, you'll find your way through to it, right? And I think actually some of the most successful things we've had come from a very non-traditional background, and then you kind of figure out your own road in.
Evalyn, my understanding is that you've found your road in. So I would imagine that getting your first placement is the hardest. What's happened for you after that first placement? Does it get easier after that?
Yeah, I think getting my first placement was with Jake and was at Position, and it meant moving out of my mom's house earlier in my 20s. And I kind of had been from this indie background and suddenly was like, oh, holy hell, this is incredible that there's money to be made. I think it doesn't always get easier, but I think you suddenly realize what works, and you can take that to different projects you're working on, whether they're sync oriented or it's something you're doing for a smaller up and coming artist or your own personal project. Like whatever you're doing then moving forward, I think you're more aware of how sync plays a role and how you can hit that market and how you can use elements of kind of things that work really well in the sync world to enhance what you're doing, because then it becomes a huge part of, I think every musical piece you're working on.
So Evalyn started building on that idea of like, who you knew. How did you know to get to Jake? And did you have placements and syncs as something that was your ambition even before you met Jake?
Yeah, I think it's something that had been on my radar, but that I hadn't paid a ton of attention to be honest with you. It was kind of this elusive unicorn thing. And then actually, I stumbled into it. I really lucked out. I was working really hard on a solo project, and I ended up working with two of actually Michael's artists. And we kind of pieced together some stuff, and they had mentioned that they were kind of working on a lot of sync-oriented material at the time. And I kind of had this moment of like, let's give it a shot. And from there is kind of, I think it was actually artist to artist, really exploring it with another artist who was already rooted in that world and kind of building off of that momentum from there on out.
Gotcha. Thank you. And Naaman, when you're getting material from artists or for people who are trying to place music for artists, are you getting like a catalog of music and then looking for the right opportunity, or is that backwards?
I mean, for me, it depends a lot on the project. As far as a catalog of music, for example, I download just about everything that is sent to me. It might take me a while to go through it, but catalog-wise, for a search, going through my own catalog, my own super ridiculous organizing strategy of playlists for what I might need. But a lot of times when it comes to specific searches and projects, rather than depending on how much time I actually have, which a lot of the work that I do is in promos, trailers, video game advertising, marketing in general, the timetables are normally extremely quick. So I might not have time to like deep dive through an entire catalog, especially when I want to kind of explore as many options as quickly as possible. So I'll reach out to people that I know and trust in their catalog and their knowledge of their catalog, like Jake, and just be like, hey, I'm working on this new Call of Duty project. I need this type of stuff. Send me what you have. And I'll do that with like a handful of people to start with. And then if I need to broaden out from there, I will.
So, Jake, it sounds to me like, based on what Naaman's saying, that you're just one of those gatekeepers that gets great music to these placements. Are there any hacks or workarounds, especially ones that you employed perhaps early in your career, that independent artists who haven't yet developed a relationship with you should be thinking about, or finding a way to get past you and get to Naaman so that they can get a placement?
Yeah, I mean, I think the ultimate, if you talk about gatekeepers, the ultimate gatekeeper probably is the music supervisor for someone in a Naaman position. And then it's really about the best strategy and tactic, whoever you are, to get the music to Naaman, or even a director on a film or a showrunner on a TV show. That can be accomplished through going through a publishing company or a sync representative or an artist on their own. And it all starts with incredible music. Any other step after that is pretty much useless if the music's not, in my estimation, major label caliber. That's what we strive to do. That's what I strive to do. Given that's the case, then there's tactics and things you can do. I've been in the business for a while, and I know I have a number of friends like Naaman, so I've been able to kind of get in the inside and figure out kind of how they operate and how they receive music, how to present it to them, how to email, how not to email, what programs to use, what alts and edits to send, how often to send, how to cater things to them. So there's these nuances that you can kind of learn. And there's courses out there and there's blogs and such. I've even done a course on it. And there are certainly nuances you can learn to help kind of tee your music up to get it received the best way. You can also be doing homework, probably like any artist should be, if you've sort of targeted what media you want to be in. Like, go research what the release dates are for those things, and read through the credits. Go on IMDb, see who the music supervisors are. It's not genius stuff. It just takes some effort and some organization. But the information's out there. And while most major labels may not be super accessible to an independent artist, there's a fair number of mid-level and boutique type companies that, again, if an artist does their homework, there's the company I work at, and there's competitors in that space too. And you can generally email them and call them, and it's like, that's a lot more accessible than a major label. Now, to Naaman's point, you may not get a response when you want it that week, because we are all extremely busy, and it's only gotten busier, honestly, in the last 5 or 10 years. You're adding on Netflixes and Apple TVs of the world and esports, and the amount of activity and the speed in which it goes is really impressive. And same for me, as someone who spends most of my day listening to music. I might not be the ultimate gatekeeper, but I'm very likely not getting back to someone submitting that week. I'll put it in the queue behind the week's worth of submissions I already have from last week. And it might even take me 3 or 4 weeks. In fact, I just had to email someone yesterday who sent me a link, I think a week ago, using WeTransfer. Nothing against WeTransfer, but I had to nicely write back and be like, hey, I finally got around to downloading your music and there's nothing there. Like, can you do me a favor and go ahead and upload it to a non-expiring link? That would be actually be my second tip after having incredible music. My second tip would be, no matter what else you do, make sure you put your music in some sort of non-expiring link. So when the person finally has time to listen to it for like 3.5 minutes or 10 minutes, they'll actually listen. Because if you have that opportunity and there's nothing there, most likely they'll move on and you won't get that shot again.
Mike,
Paul,
this will sound familiar to you.
Paul, I maybe just wanted to bounce off something the panel's been talking about a little bit, because I think we're talking a lot about like the entry points into this world. And I'm an artist manager, and for a long time, I had a lot of trouble getting into this world myself. I started kind of in like, for those familiar with like the Warped Tour, kind of like pop punk scene. All of my bands, wanted to get synced and figure out publishing and placements. And it's not a super big market for punk music, for pop punk music, for metal music, for hardcore music. Jake, I've gotten to work with most people on this panel in some capacity, right? And I can say Jake is a very brilliant A&R person at a publishing company. I really love working with him. I think it might be surprising to a lot of people that a publishing company has an A&R person, right? Because you generally think as a manager, as an artist, you generally think there's an A&R person at a record label, right? And their job is to like find bands. And of course, an A&R's job at a record label is much more involved than finding bands. There's an A&R person at a publishing company, and their job is much more involved than finding artists. Jake's job, and he's very good at this, is understanding the pulse of what people are looking for, right? And being able to communicate that now to the clients that I represent, and to say, hey, you know what? We need something that's like kind of bright and cheery right now, or you know what? The mood of advertising or whatever is moving a little bit of a different direction. So why don't we dial this back and let's make something a little indier, a little grungier, or something like that. What I've actually found is my most successful artists now in this world are the ones who have come from, the pop punk background, where they've just been in studios. They've made 5, 6, 7 albums right through the record label system, and have now come out of that system and gone, wow, you know what? We're just really good at collaborating, at being able to go into a studio, at being able to take direction, and kind of the end point for them has been now moving more into the publishing world, where they can sit down and they can talk to Jake and they can collaborate on a song. And Jake may send 3 or 4 versions of notes through before that song even makes it past Jake to the next person, because now as a team we've really dialed that in. So it's kind of been a very long process for a lot of my artists. And we talk about like, is it the Holy Grail for? Yeah, it certainly is. I think there's a bit of a caveat of like, yeah, it's the Holy Grail for a lot of artists that kind of work in this space too, right? There's a lot of artists that just doesn't work in this space, and that's where our emphasis is on like touring and streaming, which is a very different route. Yeah, I don't know, Jake, if I described that all right for you.
Yeah, no, I think, look, it's nice to hear someone I work so closely with talk about it and me in an objective way. I think it's a really good point about, I think it's actually not common knowledge that most publishers have an A&R person. That kind of is a revelation to a number of people, because the big idea out there is a record label. But there's quite a number of stories where if you go back and research how a band got to where they were, in the very first or second paragraph of them telling about their story, it's how they linked up with the publisher. And that publisher opened all these doors to them, and one of those doors ended up being ultimately a record deal. but people kind of gloss over that and get to the sexy part of the record deal. I don't personally think the record label side is super sexy. I mean, there are things attractive about it, but for pure gratification, a publishing company is completely my speed. Developing acts and just watching the immediate success. And this is not an exaggeration when I say I've been involved with artists who have gone off. I mean, Evalyn hinted at it by moving out of her apartment, but some of the successes we've had, artists have gone off and writers in multiple cases bought houses, bought cars. I mean, there's any number of examples of when you get it right, it can be fire. Like, it can be really impressive. And not to get off on a tangent, but I think to answer your question, Mike, that pointing out that even the A&R side exists on the publishing side and helping really craft your songs is an important thing for an artist to know, because I believe that an artist needs to figure out what the end line is and how to target their strategy to kind of get into the business. And you have a leg up if you understand who the fundamental kind of movers and shakers are within, I don't mean myself, but I mean that represents the roles within the business and who you can target. And if you can literally make a list of like, I want to know those 5 people in the business. Okay, now I have a target. Let me figure out how to get there. Like, having a blueprint is much more important than being like, oh, I'm going to put out great music and somebody will come find me. Like, that's not a strategy.
There's sorry, I just want to add one more thing to Jake, if that's okay. So there's a lot of artists, and I'm not judging this in any way, right? But there's a lot of artists who like to turn in a song or turn in an album, and they go, "This is my creative expression, and this is the song," right? And that's, in my experience, the very opposite of how a smoother process for this world works. This is almost creating something for someone else, right? In a lot of cases. So you're kind of sitting here taking direction from another company going, hey, can we create music? You, of course, have your artistic fingerprints all over this, and some of why my artists get very excited to live in this world. And this is maybe more artists who work exclusively in this world, who are not necessarily like touring artists who then do this. There's a lot of clients that we represent who are just writing right in this capacity, where they like to sit down, and they can sit down and write an indie rock run song one day, and the next song they could be working on a super rhythmic, very energetic type of song. And both of them are successful, and both of them are really cool creative outlets for them.
Michael, you've brought up like 4 things I cannot wait to ask about, but I before we get there, because man, this is all like really great. Thank you everybody so far, by the way. This is awesome. Naaman, is there, for somebody who's trying to find music supervisors and connect and make those kind of connections for themselves, is there a big difference between music supervisors working in video games versus TV shows versus films versus TV, commercials, or are you guys doing all the same stuff? Are you working across all these different, we'll call them, platforms?
It's a mixed bag, really. I mean, in my experience, like for trailers, for instance, there's everything from independent music supervisors like myself to music supervisors who work in-house at big trailer houses. For TV and film, a lot, unless they're in-house at a studio or a network like an NBC or a Universal Pictures or something like that, a lot of the independent music supervisors that work in those spaces tend to kind of cast as big a net as they can. But if you've kind of come up in TV, the contacts for TV, and maybe you've done some films, so you have some producers, directors that you've worked with in the past, and maybe you pick up a film or 2 a year, and vice versa. If you do mainly bigger films, but you pick up a show here or there. Trailers and marketing seem to be a little bit more siloed because they are a little more, I don't know, in my experience, they're a little more different from the TV and film world. When you start dealing with marketing, you start dealing with the marketing firms, and ad agencies are even their own thing when you get into brands. So there is a bit of segmentation, but yeah, music supervisors, especially independent ones, like me, for example, I try to get my hands in everything just because I enjoy the nuances of all the different areas.
I will jump in real quick and say that Naaman and I are both kind of gamer geeks anyway, and so we part of my job is pitching our catalog to the video game space, and I know the publishers and developers pretty well, a lot of the same ones that Naaman works with and does business for. So in that respect, the video game world can be a little bit more nuanced than the standard sort of film and TV, and it makes Naaman and myself particularly well suited for that space because we spend a lot of time playing video games, and I listen to podcasts about video games, and I read books about video games, and Naaman and I have played VR games together, blowing shit up. So we're just sort of well dialed in with that space anyway, and what those audio directors are looking for, and because we live in that world, and that can be a different world than the sort of constantly the constant output of TV and film and trailers versus like a maybe 4 or 5 year, 6 year, game development cycle for some of these publishers.
Evalyn, can I ask you, when you are being asked to write for a placement, how is that different for you creatively? And is it something that you are challenged by, or is it something that you go, oh, I can't believe I'm doing this? What's your impression when those types of opportunities fall in front of you?
Yeah, I think there are a couple ways to approach it. Sometimes there's something very specific. There's a brief for something that it's a target. And I think that can be a creative challenge, a really unique one. I actually tend to do more kind of broader sync writing, and then kind of go after, Jake will go and target certain, opportunities with that. And I guess this harkens back a little bit to what Jake and Michael were saying earlier about the A&R process. Is I think the one thing that across the board has to be done is the quality has to be really high, whatever you're doing. I think sometimes people think you can write something jingly or something that is just kind of, open-ended, and it will land well for whatever you're doing, whether it's a video game, whether it's a target ad, something like that. But I think the truth is it has to be really high quality and really well written. And even the simplest stuff has been really thought through. And so I think it's always a creative challenge. I think it's always really fun to stretch new creative muscles, to do things in different genres, to plan for a certain target and work, with a new kind of soundscape. I don't know if that answers your question, but
I'll jump in real quick too and say, having worked with Evalyn for a number of years, that this space has become a lot more competitive in the last 5 to 8 years as well. And so when Evelyn's referring to, and needing to make sure the quality is really high, there might have been a time where like you could demo something out and be like, play it for someone and be like, okay, now imagine this, like, and will that work? We're way past that. So there's so many people in this space now, and you throw in all the, all the record labels and publishers as well with indie artists, that pretty much the first time Naaman's going to receive a song from me, it's going to be a completely written, completely mixed, professionally mastered, ready to like be commercially put out song. And that's the kind of stuff that Evalyn's referring to. Anything that passes through ultimately the end zone from me to any client will be something that, heck, we've upstreamed a number of artists we've developed at the company I work with to major labels. They're paying attention as well now. So the point is simply that it's a really competitive space. If someone has a snapshot in time of what they thought it was 10 or even 5 years ago, it's evolved since then. And so it really requires operating at a professional level at each sort of stage of creation all the way to delivery, and just assuming that you are in fact going up against the new developing artist on a major label who will probably take that sync for the same fee that you will be offered. But you have to be better. You have to be better than they are.
So Evalyn, did you know that your music was already cinematic, already ready for this world? How did you know that you were creatively able to do this?
It definitely took some time to kind of, get my feet wet and really get into it and feel confident in the space. But I think that I have definitely done a fair share of sessioning in LA, doing kind of pop writing. And pop writing is, in a different way, also very simple, but very, very like evocative and very well thought out. And so I think there's a translation between the two. And then I think what's cool about getting into the sync space is the first project I really worked on was a blues rock project. And I think at the time I was just geeking out over Kay Flay, and she was having a huge moment. And I was also watching her songs sync like hotcakes, like everywhere. She was everywhere. And every cool show I watched, she was on. And I think I realized that so much of what I was consuming on television was really like the soundtracks were really cutting edge and the coolest stuff. And so, you know, it was a really interesting way for me to kind of take my songwriting chops and my vocal ability and kind of dabble in these worlds that I've kind of was really inspired by and was really seeing be so amazing on television, and that people were getting so into, and be able to kind of dabble in that, even if it wasn't necessarily my solo project.
Excellent. Awesome. Michael, Jake had mentioned earlier that, you know, it's getting to be very, very competitive. Are there any trends that are happening inside sync, or things that media is looking for that you and your artists are able to take advantage of now that to help you kind of cut through some of that competitiveness that's going on now?
That's actually what I call and ask Jake every week, because my job is, you know, to trust my team, right? And Jake is a very integral member of the team. One of the things that certainly helps, right, along the vein of this, is when my artists have learned production and are very good at doing production on their own, have built their own studio, are able to go work on something where if we get a call in the morning that goes, hey, I need a song by tonight, right? Can you turn this around? And you're writing a song from scratch and producing a song and getting it mixed and getting it mastered and delivered within a day. That's kind of where we need to be at for most of my clients. And, you know, luckily now they've been in a position where they can do this. I think, you know, one of the hardest parts for me to tell a lot of my clients and to remind them is that a lot of times in this world, it's almost like how I picture actors feel, right? So you could be a phenomenal actor and you go out for a casting call and you're going to a call every single day, and maybe you're going to 2 a day, and maybe you're going to 3 a day, and you just get told no all the time, right? Every single time. And you get that one, and that one is a super big win, and you end up on a sitcom or whatever that is, and that's wonderful. A lot of big writers in this world, you know, their percentage of songs that go on to, you know, be used in some capacity is still very low, right, in the broad scheme of things. And I think it's very hard for an artist to spend a lot of time working on a song and turning in a song and feeling very proud of a song, and knowing that there's a very good chance that song's going to sit on someone's hard drive for eternity, and that's the extent that that song will be used, right? And so part of this is, we're talking about tools, part of the tools is just, you know, kind of the morale of going, hey, you know what, this is a battle of attrition, and you're going to get out there and you're going to make a bunch of songs. And I've had plenty of cases where those songs, a year later, people go back and go, oh, you know what, now this is kind of a hot artist, or the sound's changed a little bit and we need something that's whatever, a little darker, and your song's from it, and we can go out and pull that stuff, right? But yeah, to wake up every day and work on these songs and then, you know, no. But you get that one big win and it makes it all worth it, right? And even developing artists are very much in the same boat sometimes as very big established artists.
So does that impact positively or negatively? Because I would imagine at least just the practice of needing to create something today and then balance that with the challenge of being told no over and over. Does that impact the rest of your client's career, the side of the career that fans are seeing and that part of it?
You know, I think this will be a really great question for the rest of the group too. My 2 cents here is that a lot of the artists I work with are very diverse in how they, you know, approach their day, their year. So I I no matter what, try and schedule in breaks, regardless. So if that means, hey, you know what, you're taking 2 days off and then coming back to this with a fresh perspective, okay, so be it. If it means you're going to take a month off and go on tour because you're maybe more traditional artist, then that's, you know, a wonderful outlet for you to go out. I think sometimes the trouble becomes, you know, you're working on something and maybe you get told no, and then you don't add life experience to your songwriting. That can become a very difficult place to keep going, because you may just like keep working on songs, but like something has to be different, right? And very often that thing is just living, right? Having experiences, having something to talk about, having a different perspective on something. So part of my role is I very much encourage that with our clients.
Jake, do you find within the artists that you are working with that there's that sort of a dividing line between those who want to do the touring, the traditional route as songwriters and performers, versus those that want to stick with, predominantly doing syncs and placements? And is there a transition that happens with artists where they start in one place and end up someplace else?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think of it as much in terms of a dividing line. I think of it more as an almost eventual transition. And, you know, I think it kind of it can happen slowly, and it can also be pretty closely aligned with the artist, you know, how do I put this? Hitting new milestones in their life and maybe not wanting to be on the road as much. So whether that's represented in you know, getting married and having a kid or two, and maybe hitting your 40th birthday and like having grounded out, or your 30th birthday, whatever, having grounded out in a van for 10 years and been like, that was a really important part of my life. And I'm kind of over that. And like, in the meantime, the last year or two, I've seen some cool things happen with some songs I've been writing that were kind of for fun. But like, that's becoming more important to me now. And the other thing that I thought was important, it's not so much important, you know, because and I don't know, it's, you know, if it's 20-year-old artists that'll be watching this, or 25 or 45, but things that used to seem important in life can fundamentally change as you get older. And then other things come into light, or you think of things differently, or you see things differently. And you don't know that that's going to come necessarily. So there will always be artists who are stars, and they should be on an arena stage, and they should be crushing it, lighting up millions of people's lives. And they can be doing this either supplementally, or the songs that they're writing anyway are just such bangers that they're going to be going out and getting licensed, whether it's the Imagine Dragons of the world or whatever. And then there's a good chunk of artists and writers who are like, yeah, I put in my time. That was a really important time in my life. Things have fundamentally changed. I'm really enjoying writing and being part of a community and staying home a lot more and getting a cup of coffee with a friend at 1 o'clock and not being in like Jacksonville, Florida on the way to my next night. And so there ends up being this transition that can take, it usually takes a couple years for someone that it really strikes a chord with. And then they settle in and they're like, yeah, this is a really good change. And then if you really throw gas on that fire and they really double down, then it can be sort of a game changer and a life changer. And so that's the best way I can put it from the many artists and writers that I've seen go through that. I'll put it this way. Very few who've had a fair amount to a lot of success in the sync world are then like, screw that. I'm going to go get back in a van and drive around with 4 other smelly people and like, you know, for 6 months and play to like 90 people.
Mike, he's telling the story, I think, of Ice Nine Kills in almost like real time. I mean, you got that awesome placement during the World Series with the Yankees for the song Savages. Like, how did that come about, and how has that or has that changed Spencer's perspective on placements and syncs and in the same way that Jake's talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, Michael touched on it earlier where, you know, we kind of come from the same world. Maybe my rosters have been a little bit more hard leaning on the metal side. but a very similar process. And, you know, you mentioned the song Savages, which Ice Nine Kills has a song called Savages. And that was really, I don't want to say, I mean, it was kind of a freak thing, right? Like, I think somebody from the Yankees organization or somebody called the Yankees Savages, right? And really our artist is the one who tipped us off to it. I mean, the guy's from Boston, but he said, look, I mean, you know, I believe that sometimes things happen for a reason. There's a song, you know, they've used this term, they're going into the playoffs. I don't think the Yankees actually made it to the World Series, you know, all hands on deck. Let's figure out a way in and figure out a way to pitch. And, you know, thankfully, even though, well, you know, the record label who doesn't own, you know, the composition side of our music, they own the master side, they had some ins and, you know, got it into the right hands. And lo and behold, you know, I think there was a number of songs that were up against it. And for whatever reason, they probably didn't know the band was from Boston. They chose the track. And, you know, it was a real highlight for him, you know, for this artist that's been grinding it out for a long time. His dad lives in New York. We got him tickets to the game. He went and saw it up on the Jumbotron. And, you know, yeah, that's a really exciting moment for an artist. And I could see how, you know, the process Jake describes, it's interesting because though I haven't really had that with many of my artists, you know, it's the same that I see a lot of people like myself who were once a tour manager, then move into another realm of the business. You know, it's like, do I really need to be out on the road anymore? And the hardest part, right, is trying to figure out what during that interim period, you know, if you're doing well on the road, transitioning off the road, no matter what, you've got to have a way to have some income. So really fascinating discussion.
Yeah. Naaman, there's been some talk about genres and, you know, the punk, metal, and all the rest of it. Like, are there certain genres that are more appropriate for syncs in general, or maybe even specifically for video games that you keep an eye out for, genres that you just like don't bother with at all?
Oh man. I mean, obviously for music supervision as a whole, it runs the gamut completely from classical to black metal, you know, it goes all the way. For video games specifically, I keep my ears open for a lot of hip hop, electronic, rock. Any combination of those three works really well. It just depends on kind of the genre of the game. If you've got something more action oriented, you're gonna want more action, upbeat kind of stuff. Sometimes there's fun ways to incorporate other sounds. Like one of my, unfortunately, I didn't get to work on this, but one of my favorites in recent memory is The Last of Us and The Last of Us 2, using a lot of like the composer Gustavo's really like kind of calming, but it also comes off as a bit eerie acoustic guitar licks, and
That's awesome. I'll throw this question, Jake and Michael, if one of you guys can really jump on this. It just seems like, you know, there's been a lot of evolution in placements in that there used to be just 3 TV channels broadcasting. Now there's tons of narrowcasting and maybe even some opportunities in new digital media. Jake, you had mentioned earlier that there was a lot of it's competitive because of so many people wanting to get these placements, but are there also more opportunities now than before?
I mean, yeah, hands down. So I mean, there's more people listening to music than ever before in history. There's more music than ever before, and there's more opportunities for it than ever before. And we could break down all the different media and all the different avenues within all that different media. Just know that there are a lot of opportunities, whether it's because there's more media or there's more Netflix and you're adding these, but also if you go into advertising, I mean, Facebook has their own types of ads, Instagram has their own types of ads, you know, TikTok. You can break it down, and that's part of Naaman's job. Is he's having to probably determine what properties does Call of Duty want to use for this advertisement. Is it going to be Is it going to be a swipe up campaign? Is it going to be a storytelling campaign on Facebook? That stuff's all new, and there's things going on. We get inquiries into our company of things that we weren't even aware of. I was researching a VR company today that just sold to Facebook 6 months ago, and I'm like, how are they not on my radar? And what are their needs? There's another conversation I had with a company that will be huge in about a year and a half, that have some really big heavy hitters that are reaching out to some other really big video game and sports companies. And and the whole game takes place. It's hard to describe. It's like a festival for different brand properties that you and your avatar live in as you pop around to different brands. And those are all going to need their own music and their own genres. And it needs to feel like it's, I don't know, that it needs to be compelling music, and it needs to feel like it flows really easily. Anyway, point is, there's a lot of different opportunities that people aren't even aware of yet. And that also opens up the type of music that will be needed as well, which Naaman sort of alluded to. But, there's areas that need ambient music. There's other areas that, or media that needs, Mike, referenced the Savages song. That kind of runs the gamut right there between almost experimental ambient music all the way up to hard, to heavy metal type music and anything in between. The nice thing about a lot of these networks is, and even YouTube and whatnot, is it's allowed for the real growth of niche sort of programming. And when you get niche programming, that means they know, those programmers know what kind of music they need. And that kind of need may not have existed 5 or 10 years ago. And now, because there's an outlet for it and a demand for it, that, there might be like light piano music that nobody really cared about, that now there's a massive YouTube channel for, that has hundreds of millions of followers, and they need to be pushing content through, and Content ID is generating money for everybody involved, which is just a different type of licensing, really.
Gotcha. And Michael, with your clients, are your clients identifiable with certain niches, either creative niches or as far as the music that they're creating, or are they flexible, and is it dependent on artists? Is it make it easier for supervisors and publishers to identify an artist with a certain sound, rather than being able to say, we can do anything you want?
Yeah, I think those are great questions. When I started working more with writers and producers, I actually started on the side where we were pitching to other artists, right? So there's a few kind of different categories that this all breaks down into. But if you have a team of people and they're like, hey, we want to pitch this song for Katy Perry or Demi Lovato or whatever, right? Sometimes artists take outside songs and then put their own fingerprints on them. And sometimes, they don't want to take outside songs and they only want to do their own. But there's enough that want to take outside songs that we were starting to work with artists who were becoming very well known in their own space as artists. So we said, okay, why don't we, have them work a little bit for these other artists. Makes sense. I think the problem we were running into when we went that direction, right, is if you're writing for a very well-known specific, pop artist, you have the spectrum here, and every song that's going to get pitched to that major label artist is really going to go from here to like here, right? Everything's going to fall within this zone. So you have all this out here and you have all this space out here that's just not going to be even looked at. And especially when you're in this space, right, you're competing against some of the biggest and best writers and producers in the world, right? So you're working against Max Martin, you're working against Benny Blanco, like you're working against these people. So for us, as a management company, said, well, we either have to get our artists to a point where they're going to be better, right, than Benny Blanco. And we had the good fortune of working with Benny on some of my artist tracks, and Benny's phenomenal, right? He's one of the best for a reason. So how are you going to be better than that? It's very tough. So the route that has worked, and we've seen this with some of our peers, is they said, you know what, we're not going to go head to head, right? We're going to go find this other route. We have to be different enough and either start a new sound or a new style, or there was a big producer who came in who really rethought what a chorus was, right? And a lot of the choruses became instrumental choruses in pop music that kind of had the own hook within the instrumental, right? So that was their unique take on what pop music would look like. When we start to look more into this space, for me as a manager, I'm sometimes more interested in what are these genres and niches that are being overlooked, right? And so I think this plays very much into Jake's point. I think one of the most successful projects we ended up ever having is we had a phenomenal writer-producer who didn't fit into a traditional box in any sense. And, before they were working with us, they were pitching for these big, top 40 type of things. And they were kind of so far afield that they weren't landing with these places. And we ended up finding, literally like a violin player on YouTube and connecting them. And their first album together, went, I think it went gold in 20 countries or something like that. No one would expect that to happen. But if you're able to sort of, a big part of what we do, and I think everyone on this panel would agree, is matching the right people. And there's just when I came more from the touring world, there'd be artists that you have never, ever, ever, ever heard of who are out there selling 5,000 tickets a night, right? Anywhere in the world, they can go somewhere and play 5,000 tickets in there. They're like, I've never heard of this person. How is this possible? And yet it's a massive, big business for these niche type of artists. And I think that does still exist in this world. Some are more common than others, but I think getting creative and figuring out how can I take what I'm really good at, maybe it's not traditional pop music or traditional alt pop music or whatever that is, but how can I take that and study what is working and combine all of this together and try and find success on my own terms. And I think that's very exciting for everyone here.
Yeah. Evalyn, with your perspective on it, coming from the creative side, how are you approaching what you do as far as genres and moods and that sort of thing? Are you trying to stay within a particular range, or are you feeling creatively capable of being more sort of flexible?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'm trying to frequently stay in a certain energy. I think that I'm trying to create music that carries a certain feeling about it, especially things. I do a lot of up-tempo. I think I see a lot of up-tempo working places. And so things that are either driving and intense or feel very powerful from a female perspective, or that feel kind of, the things that can create a mood and an energy, I think work really, really well for me. I don't usually feel inhibited by genre. I just really try and be cognizant of how the writing works, how the lyricism works, and how, it can feel commercially viable. Because I think that's things that feel maybe like they're pushing boundaries in a certain genre. But if at the same time, if they feel commercially viable, I think they'll perform well in a sync kind of world. That's kind of what I've seen. And also I wanted to jump off what Michael was saying too really quickly, which is that I've definitely come from that world a bit too, of wanting to pitch things and then seeing that kind of transition over to the sync side. And I think that's true for a lot of people who end up in sync who are really good writers. And I think a reason why that is because you're honing your craft so hard and you're writing things for a specific format, a specific reason, and that works very well in sync too if you have that understanding. And I think simultaneously you can still kind of do both. I tend to work with a lot of other artists on their projects, and I hone some of the same skills in that world that I do in sync. I'm kind of embodying whatever that project is and figuring out what needs to happen to accomplish a song that will work for them or in that world, sonically. And I think that they actually really kind of almost work well together. They improve your skills. And I think that it's, the best part about it is if you can make money in sync, you are not as hell-bent on, every single time you pitch a song to an artist, having it land so you can feed yourself. I think that's why they're very well suited to kind of work together.
I mean, I'll add on too, having seen it from a lot of different artists, is that, I mean, even talking to Michael or being able to, I am Evalyn like I did today, telling her that she's got a couple more confirms coming her way for some TV shows. It's just, I feel like it's a lot more gratifying for an artist with a lot more wins coming in, and getting those gratifying wins can sort of really keep the overall vibe and just positive, versus like, I imagine going out for writing for a number of pop sessions and just really hoping maybe one of yours connects somewhere that could change your life. It's kind of like trying to swing for a home run every time. Instead of like, you can just step up and just keep on hitting, hitting singles, hitting doubles, and hearing back, like in an Evalyn case or in some of Michael's clients' cases where I'm emailing them very often, being like, hey, we got 2 more coming your way this week, 3 more this week. And you just keep on getting these wins. And it's just very gratifying to know that you are, that your music is connecting on some creative level, and then the money component too. But to me, that feels like, I mean, we get emails back from the artists, and you can sort of get a sense of how well it was received, and how kind of can like change their day or change their week.
Yeah. And
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to quickly say to people who are watching this, who are kind of interested in this lane, but in general, kind of trying to figure out where they might find an entry point, stuff like this. I think a lot of what it comes down to is working your ass off and diversifying and doing, everything you can, but doing it the best you possibly can. Because like me, I didn't expect to walk into a career in sync, and I did. And I think part of that is because I was diversifying and doing a lot of different things and doing them as well as I possibly could. And that's kind of how I think sometimes it works out.
I got to admit, I was hoping you were going to say, just stay out of my way. But
but just stay out of my way. But if it works out, it works out.
I'll add in just real quickly that Evalyn's a really hard worker, and I get to peek into all the spreadsheets she makes and all the records she keeps and all the follow-ups she does. And this is the other half of being a professional songwriter that well, maybe I don't want to give away your trick. Sorry, Evalyn. But that a lot of songwriters don't really put on the hat that they need to really step it up and take it to the next level. And she's as hard of a worker as she is creative. And so it's kind of like a double threat. And that's what starts piquing the interest of people, when you can deliver from beginning to end, and someone can have a level of confidence and you not question whether you can get it into the end zone or not. So I just didn't want her to skip past the fact that she's a really hard worker, and it wasn't luck. I mean, I see what she's doing on a daily basis, and she's booking a lot of sessions on her own, even though I'm her publisher and we're helping out a lot. I mean, she got it off and running on her own, and all I had to do was pour fuel on it.
That's awesome. Jake, can you talk about the money side? How do you value a placement?
Oh, that's a good question. There's a real art to that. There's ranges. You can pull someone aside, like go to coffee with Naaman, and probably get a range out of what something, but fundamentally there's different variables. I mean, quite honestly, there's the song itself, there's the profile of the artist and the writer, and what action is involved, how much activity the artist has around them. But then there's the basics too, like the terms that are being requested for the song, should you get that far in the process, which is, what's the territory, what's the duration, you can go down a checklist of 5 or 6 different things. Is it the main version? Is it the instrumental version? Do you need it for all media, for just the US? Is it geo-locked? So that there's those kind of basic items you go down. Each box that you check helps you sort of bring the range down into kind of a more finite quote, because ultimately these aren't fees regulated by the government. This is an actual negotiation where the the owner of the composition and the recording have the ability to get into a negotiation and charge what they think it's worth. And quite honestly, this is one of the trickiest parts of the business, and it would be for an independent artist too, because if you don't have the information, you just, how do you know how to value your own work? Or if I was my first year into trying to represent art, how do I know how to value? If someone's going to offer me $5,000 all in, which we can either cover later or you guys can Google it for those who are watching. But actually you could have gotten $15,000 for it. Then that's like, there's a disconnect there. Now, $5,000 is a lot of money. Like, let's be honest. $15,000 is a lot more, and that's your value. And like, I work at a company of 30 people who've collectively got a lot of years in this business, and I'm thankfully able to rely now on other people. In a few cases, when a request comes to the owner of the rights, there will be a fee in there, and it's either that is the budget, so you're actually taking that, or you're going to lose it. No disrespect to the artist, that's the bottom line. Like, you can take it or we'll find something else. Sometimes it's negotiable, but oftentimes, you'll receive a quote request for the use, and then it begins a negotiation. So there's no hard and fast rule there. It is an art.
Naaman, as the music supervisor, I imagine there's times where your mind latches onto a song that's just perfect and there can't be another one. It has to be this one. Does that happen, or does that influence what we're talking about here, the ability for an artist or their publisher to negotiate a higher rate for its use?
Oh man, trying to think of the best way to answer that.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes there is just whether it's myself, the director, somebody else involved with the project, has just this lightning bolt idea, and it's like, that's the song. So they or myself somebody will come to me and we'll all be like, oh yeah, that's the track. So we need to go out, and I need to go out and figure out who owns, the publishing splits, the master, possible master split, all that kind of stuff. And just get a quote. Ultimately, it's all going to come down to what can be done with the budget. And 99.9% of the time, at least from my perspective, I will always try to get a straight answer on what is our absolute ceiling budget for this. And there can then be some negotiation there, but I don't usually mess around with haggling. Like, if I know how much money we can spend on something, normally I'll just go straight to the approval parties and be like, this is the money that I have. Can we make this work?
So, and I can just say, because Naaman and I just went through this a week and a half ago together, that is a breath of fresh air from our perspective, because it sets in motion a lot of other things. I now know what I can pitch. Now I know what I can deal with, and to make his life easier, because now I won't pitch things that are twice that cost. So when he texted me the other week and was like, I have a project I want to put you on, this is the budget, can we make it work for that? Then I can flip through my brain and be like, yeah, I definitely have high quality people that can make it work for that. If he'd shot me a different number, it might have been a different group of people or different songs, but it just makes the whole process easier. And luckily he had the flexibility to do it in that case. I don't know if I doubt you always have that flexibility, Naaman. I don't really know.
No.
Well, Michael,
I mean, more times than not, I'll actually have to, it'll go the other way around, where the producer on the project will go, my daughter loves Imagine Dragons and we have to have them in this. So they'll come at me with some, 8-year-old's favorite Imagine Dragons track. And I will already know the answer is going to be, you don't have enough money. But I'll jump through the hoops. I'll get the quote. I'll take it back to the producer. And they'll be like, oh my God, that's 10 times more money than we have to spend. I'll be like, cool. I'm going to call up some people with some really good replacements. And, that's then where I can go, here's the amount of money that we actually do have. Jake, what do you have for me?
So, Michael, you're the one with the clientele that any one of them could be that Imagine Dragons. How much effort are you and your clients putting into increasing your profile to make these kind of placements lucrative? Or is it just is it more beneficial to just invest the time into getting the placements and not worrying so much about profile?
I think it's a mix, and my really boring answer is it depends. at the end of the day, you want to be working with artists that, you really respect and that you feel like are going to do a really great job. But part of my job as a manager is identifying artist strengths, and honestly, sometimes identifying the opposite of their strengths, right? And you know what? Most of my artists aren't going to be a good fit for an Imagine Dragons replacement. And that's okay, right? I know where their strengths lie. One of the projects Jake and I worked on together early on was a band that I had managed for 10 years. And they toured all over the world. They played super high profile festivals. They did as much as they could do as an independent band. And we're very happy with that. And after 10 years, said, you know what, it's time to move into the next phase of our lives. And the two primary writers from that band said, you know what, we've been in the studio so many times. We made 6 or 7 albums, as part of this band. We want to learn production. And as part of learning production, we want to get off of the road and focus just on becoming really great songwriters. And so we're going to start a new band. And it is it's a real band that we're starting. But the emphasis is not going to be on touring and doing band stuff. It's going to be more about creating music. And, as a manager, you go, okay, well, how am I going to work with this and understand this and build the team around it? And I introduced them to Jake, and they really hit it off with Jake. And so we sat down, and Jake started to give them some direction as an A&R person, not in the way they were used to as a label A&R, right? But as a publishing A&R. And, we still did our band photos, and we still did our videos. We did all of this stuff. But Jake was helping to guide the music a little bit more into this sync world. And what ended up happening was that the songs, as a manager, how do you get your music in front of people? Well, you put your band on the road, right? Maybe if you're a pop band, you hope that you get some kind of mass media. So you get them on the radio, right? Or you get them on TV, or you get them right in syncs. So they had come from a world where they're used to touring, playing in front of people, physically standing on stage, right, playing their song, to now designing songs a little bit differently with a slightly different audience in mind. Again, still as a band, still their own creative background. And they started to build enough syncs up that people would hear a song and go, oh my gosh, who's this band? And that kept happening and it kept happening. And kind of the ironic thing through all of this is by sort of taking a step back and being like, whoa, we don't want to be this like touring band and, do the whole thing. What happened was the song ended up getting to a big enough point that a radio station added the song, and then the labels came, and the labels ended up signing the band. We sort of had to go back to the band and be like, we know, we asked you to sort of not, or we suggested and advised you, right? Like, don't be a touring band. But if you're going back on tour, we're going to do the whole game again. And it was, it was actually a nice refresh and reset for them because a lot of the pressure was off. Creatively, they were exercising all different types of creative muscles. And so, they believed in the team, and we had, people like Jake and stuff surrounding them. And that one ended up working. But the most interesting part about this business is you never know what's going to happen that day, right? Like, you could literally get that phone call that changes your life, or that one thing that happens that completely upends what you think is going to happen in your career. And those are just very exciting moments.
That's awesome. Thank you. Jake, I'm so sorry. We're going a few minutes longer. I hope you guys don't mind sticking around just a few extra. But Jake, can you walk through for people the publishing split, the reason why being the songwriter is so vitally important when it comes to syncs and placements?
Why being the writer is important. I guess for a lot of reasons, but if you're talking about sort of brass tacks in terms of income and whatnot, then
exactly.
As this could jump off into a whole other panel, which I'm going to avoid doing because that is a lengthy road. But I guess the short answer is, traditionally, when you're writing a song, you have a writer's share, which if you co-write, the other writers retain that writer's share. And there's also a publishing share component to that composition. and you can look at the publishing component as essentially an asset that can be bought and sold. And both the writers and the publishing are both designed to create income. I mean, to basically receive income coming in for that composition. By and large, the writer's share doesn't ever change hands. That's sort of put in place so that the original writers, even if they don't even know what's happening around with the publishing and the record and the recording, will always have a stream that pops up in their mailbox or in their computer because of stuff happening. The publishing side is an asset which can be bought and sold. That's the business that we are in. We dive a lot deeper in that we help generate and sort of focus the writing to best suit what our needs are and where we think we can, artists don't generally like this word, but exploit the composition and the copyright, which is essentially what we're doing. And so the writers can choose any number of avenues for the publishing portion of the composition. They can retain it if they don't want anybody touching it. They can get into a co-publishing deal where they're literally splitting the portions of the publishing with another company. They can sell the entire publishing portion if they want. Those are all at the discretion of the writer. And the publishing portion, which generates income as well, that's how publishing companies are in business, because they find a composition, or they create a composition that's of value, they exploit it and go find homes for it, sync, radio, retail, whatever. That generates income, and if they oftentimes publishing companies tend to do co-pub splits, so then they are retaining some portion of the income that comes in the publishing side, and then some portion of that publishing side is also rerouted back to the writer as well, on top of their performance income of the writer's share. So that's an attempt at a simplified version. It's actually much more complex than that, and it doesn't even take into account the master and the recording portion, which also needs to be licensed. If someone's going to, in fact, license a song, they need to license the composition, which is the music and the lyrics, and they need to license the recording, the actual tangible recorded. And those are, when you are licensing both at the same time, that's considered all in, which is the term I used before. If it's not all in, then you're referring to licensing one segment and also the other segment.
Paul, if I could have 30 seconds to piggyback off there. From a manager's perspective, right, I think we have a similar view as a publisher, but at the end of the day, I'm hired to protect my clients, right, and that they are doing the work in a room and getting compensated for it, right? And if we're talking about splitting up a song, right, the way this works is at the end of the session, everyone decides okay, I did this much on the song. And sometimes these things get really ugly, because if even one person disagrees, no one gets paid, right? So one person can step out and say, well, I think I did this much of the song, and if you disagree, then we're all gonna, so you might as well pay me the extra bits, or you're gonna get paid zero, right? So you can either get paid zero, or you can get a reduced amount, and they can get pretty nasty. They get so nasty, it's actually gone to court, and the courts have said, look, if you played the drums on the song and you did the drum parts, that's worth 5% of the song, and if you did the lyrics, that's worth 20-something% of the song. So the courts have a system, but at the end of the day, it doesn't go there, right? Generally, you're doing so many sessions, you're getting to the point where you're saying, okay, well, if you did the music and I did the lyrics and melody, right, maybe that's half and half. And if I have someone help me on the lyrics, then I'm going to give my 50% cut in this other person, and they're going to and if you did all the music, then you keep your 50%, even though there's a bunch of people. I might have 10 people help me with the lyrics. You still keep your 50%. I'm going to split up my 50% 10 ways. Generally, the way we've done these sessions is if there's 3 people all in a room together, then everyone just gets an equal amount, because you're kind of all coming up with ideas together, and maybe someone, and it keeps it clean and simple. I have seen a lot of sessions where at the end of the session, sometimes it gets very particular of like, well, no, I did this and I did this and I did this, and that's also a very fair way to split things up too, as long as there's an understanding among everyone of how this is going to work. I think the difficulty becomes, and hopefully this answers your question, and from a management perspective, is if you have a writer and they get maybe a large personality, or they have someone who absolutely feels like they contributed the key component of why the song got synced. And even though it's just this tiny, 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 tiny little piece, maybe it is the reason, it's the most memorable part, it's a tiny little riff in a song or something like that. How do you equitably decide how much of the song that's worth? Because once you decide on these numbers, you get paid an upfront fee, right, to use the song, but almost always you get residuals, right? And so this money just comes in forever and ever, and that money is divided up based on these percentages that you've agreed upon. So part of the nuance, I think, as a manager, as we're filling this out, is like, how do you figure out the teams where everyone works together creatively? They're sort of like-minded in their approach towards things. There's like so many layers on top of like, how do these teams work, right? And then you add in Jake's perspective to all of this, and you potentially add in a label's perspective, and you could have, I mean, I've been in situations where you've had 10 different perspectives of how something should operate, and it's not that any of them are right or wrong, right? They're just very different approaches.
Awesome. Thank you. Evalyn, as a musician, when you hear all that has been talked about so far, if you can try to imagine being a musician before everything happened for you, how do you hear this and get excited, don't get intimidated, and what would your advice be to people who, as you were talking about earlier, want to get into this lane from zero?
From zero. I mean, I've come from zero to get into this lane, and I think it's just a huge part is it's doable, and also a little tiny bit to touch on what Michael was just talking about when it comes to splits and stuff like that. A greater thing, like a piece of advice I would have to say, is be cool, man. Like, this is an industry of collaboration. If you are an artist, a writer, an instrumentalist, a producer, an engineer, you be yourself. Have, you know, a little bit of the ego that got you in that room to begin with, but also drop some of the ego and be someone who's known not just for the great work that you'll do, but also as being someone who's amicable to work with, someone who is interested in the music and how well the music's going to do, not just you as, you know, a solo entity. I think that's super important. Be a little bit of a team player, even if you want to be the next Billie Eilish. Like, I think she's awesome. She's kind. And I think people should know that that is a huge, huge aspect to this, is being able to like really work well, because, you know, a lot of it is getting in the rooms with people that you work really well with over and over and over again, and being fair about your splits so that the songs you create get better and better, and they can wind up in better and better homes. And all I would say to anyone else who's trying to get into this lane is really stay focused, do your homework for sure. Pay attention to what you were hearing on shows like Euphoria, like all these cool shows that are really cutting edge with their soundtracks. What are you loving? What's working? And then I would also just say, again, diversify what you're working on. You never know what's really gonna hit. So, you know, doing a couple of different things, and then just working a ton, doing a ton of sessions, being willing to kind of work on whatever you can get your hands on, and paying attention to what makes really good people really good, and kind of working toward that.
Thank you, Evalyn. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Mike,
thank you.
wrap us up. I got to say, my mind's blown. I don't know how you keep on bringing these people in, and then they're better than one from the next. Thank you all so much. I don't even know how else to say it, but this is such a demystifying of an area of the music business that there's just such so rarely a light shed on it. And I feel like you guys have done, you know, there's still so much more, but man, I feel so much smarter than I was an hour and a half ago, and a hell of as smart as I should have been 25 years ago. So this is awesome. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very humbled to even just listen in. This has been a great group. And, you know, much like I think the recurring theme in here is, you know, persistence and being nice and figuring out who you know. And, you know, really through these connections is how this panel came together. And that's, you know, been kind of marvelous. As you said, we've touched like very top level stuff, but incredibly insightful. I mean, how great is it to have, you know, though Jake does wear a manager hat, which is part of why I think I really love the position, no pun intended, that he holds in all of this. But, you know, we've got an artist, a manager, a supervisor, and a publisher. And then I'm not sure what I do. But yeah, really, this is fantastic. And, I think these guys did such a great job of explaining your question about, why it's important to, whatever the component, the asset, as Jake indicated. That's a really complicated subject for many people, even that, friends of mine that have been in this business a long time, and even myself, that's probably the last part that really started to make sense for me as I did more and more of this stuff. And Evalyn, what great words of advice. Be cool. I think that's really where this industry is going. As these guys talked about, with the being more and more opportunities. We sort of talk about, when you're all fighting over one slice of pizza, it's really, it gets pretty particular. I want the pepperoni, or I want the onion. Evalyn seemingly has not only created her own pizza, but presumably has her own pizza oven to bake it in. So you just don't get into those petty arguments anymore.
I like pizza. What can I say?
Yeah, awesome. All right, that's all I got. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you very much.